The throne room of the Zarinthian Empire was silent in a way that felt heavy, like the air itself was afraid to move. Tall silver pillars reached toward a glowing ceiling, and blue light flowed like slow water across the polished floor. At the center of the room stood Queen Alira, ruler of 7-star systems, feared by her enemies and obeyed without question by her people. Her face was calm and cold. Her long white robes shimmered like frozen mist, and on her right wrist rested the ancient Soulmate mark, a small curved symbol that looked like a sleeping flame. It had never glowed, not once, not in all her years of ruling. Before her, 2 royal guards dragged a human prisoner across the shining floor. His hands were bound with energy cuffs, his dark uniform torn and stained with dust from battle. He was only a simple human guard captured from a border conflict, weak compared to the tall, armored aliens around him. Yet he did not beg, he did not cry. He only looked up at the queen with steady eyes, and that alone caused quiet whispers among the court. Humans were seen as primitive, emotional, and reckless. They were not respected in the Empire, and they were never considered equal, especially not to royalty. The queen studied him with mild interest. This was only a formal interrogation before execution. Nothing more. Her voice was smooth and distant when she spoke, asking for his name. Daniel Reyes, he answered, his voice rough but clear. He did not kneel, not because he refused, but because the guards held him too tightly. Still, there was no fear in his tone. The court noticed, the generals frowned, the advisors watched closely. The queen felt something strange but ignored it. She stepped down from her throne, her long robe sliding softly across the floor. She wanted to see him closer, to understand why this human did not tremble before her. As she approached, one of the guards shoved Daniel forward too hard. He stumbled, losing his balance. Instinctively, he reached out to steady himself. His bound hands brushed against the queen's wrist. For a single second, nothing happened. Then the Soulmate mark exploded with light. A bright blue glow burst from the symbol, sharp and powerful, shining across the throne room like a signal flare in darkness. The air hummed. The pillars reflected the glow. Every alien in the room froze. The queen stopped breathing. The mark was not supposed to react to touch alone. It was not supposed to glow at random. It was sacred. It was ancient. It only awakened when destiny was fulfilled, and it had never responded to anyone before. But it was glowing now, and the one touching her was human. Gasps filled the chamber. Weapons activated with sharp metallic sounds. Red targeting lights aimed at Daniel's chest. The guards pulled him back violently, as if he carried a deadly disease. Daniel looked confused. His eyes moved from the glowing mark to the frightened faces around him. He did not understand alien traditions. He did not know the meaning of the light. He only knew that suddenly everyone wanted him dead. The queen slowly raised her glowing wrist, staring at it in disbelief. The blue light pulsed like a heartbeat, matching the rapid rhythm in her chest. Impossible, she whispered softly, but in the silent chamber her whisper sounded like thunder. The Soulmate mark was more than a symbol. It was a bond written in the deepest laws of their species. When it glowed, it meant the one who touched it was her destined partner, her equal soul, chosen not by politics or bloodline, but by fate itself. And fate had just chosen a human guard. Her advisors began shouting. Some demanded immediate execution. Others called for isolation. The generals looked terrified. If the queen's soulmate was human, it could destroy centuries of royal purity. It could weaken her authority. It could cause rebellion. But the queen did not speak. She kept staring at Daniel. And something unexpected moved inside her. Not weakness, not anger, but curiosity. The human did not look proud. He did not smile. He only stood there, breathing hard, trying to understand the chaos around him. For a moment, their eyes met, and the mark burned brighter. The light was no longer wild. It was steady now, strong, alive. The queen felt a strange warmth spread through her arm, traveling through her chest. It was not painful. It was not forced. It felt natural, and that frightened her more than anything. She turned to her court, her expression cold again, hiding the storm inside her mind. "Lower your weapons," she ordered calmly. The soldiers hesitated, but no one disobeyed her twice. The targeting lights disappeared, though tension still filled the air. Daniel swallowed, but remained silent. The queen stepped closer once more. Ignoring the whispers around her, she examined him as if seeing him for the first time, not as a prisoner, not as a lesser being, but as something unknown, something dangerous to her world. Her voice was quiet when she spoke again. "Take him to the royal holding chamber." The court erupted in shock, but she raised her hand and silence returned instantly. "No harm will come to him," she added firmly. Daniel was pulled away, still confused, still breathing fast, but alive. The glowing mark slowly dimmed, though it did not disappear completely. It remained faint, like sleeping fire waiting to wake again. As the massive doors closed behind the human guard, Queen Aelira looked down at her wrist one more time. The symbol shimmered softly under her skin, as if reminding her that destiny had already made its choice. And for the first time in her reign, the most powerful being in the Empire felt uncertain. If you enjoy powerful HFY sci-fi stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what happens next. Because the mark had awakened, and the Empire would never be the same again. The news did not stay inside the throne room for long. Whispers moved through the palace like cold wind through broken glass, and by nightfall the entire capital knew that the queen's soul mark had glowed for a human. Not a noble warrior, not a royal bloodline heir, but a captured guard from a minor border world. And that single detail was enough to shake the Empire more than any invasion ever had. Because the law of the soul mark was older than the throne itself, older than the capital city, older even than the written language of their species. It was carved in an ancient stone beneath the palace, protected by tradition and fear, and every child of the Empire grew up knowing one truth. When the soul mark glows, destiny has spoken, and destiny cannot be denied without terrible cost. Queen Aelira stood alone in her private chamber, staring at her wrist as the faint blue light pulsed under her skin like a quiet secret. She had ordered the room cleared. No advisors, no guards, no servants, just silence and the steady glow that refused to disappear. She pressed her fingers against the mark, hoping it would fade, hoping it would calm, but instead it warmed under her touch, as if aware of her doubt, as if waiting for her to accept what it had chosen. She remembered the lessons from her youth, how the royal scholars spoke about the mark with reverence. They said it was not romance, not simple attraction, but a bond of energy and soul, two beings balanced in strength and spirit, destined to rule together or change the path of history. And never once in recorded time had it chosen someone outside their species. In another part of the palace, far below the shining towers and glowing halls, Daniel Reyes sat inside a circular holding chamber made of transparent alloy walls. No chains now, no weapons pointed at him. Only a quiet hum of energy fields surrounding the room. He rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had been and tried to understand what had happened. He did not know what a soul mark truly meant. He only knew that touching the queen had almost gotten him killed. Yet she had stopped it, she had. Protected him. And that confused him more than the glowing symbol itself. He had faced death before in border wars. But this felt different. This felt like he had stepped into something much larger than a simple conflict. Back in the High Council chamber, tension was reaching dangerous levels. The royal advisors argued openly, something they had not done in years. One elder scholar demanded that the human be eliminated immediately before the bond could deepen. Another warned that killing a marked soulmate could bring spiritual disaster according to ancient belief. The generals were divided. Some feared weakness. Others feared rebellion from citizens who still respected the old laws deeply. Because no matter how powerful the empire had become, tradition still held invisible chains around its people. And the law of the soul mark was sacred. It stated clearly that once awakened, the bonded pair must not be separated by force. And if one was harmed intentionally, the other would suffer equal pain, sometimes even death. That final line of the law spread through the council like poison. If the human was killed, what would happen to the queen? No one knew for certain. The ancient texts were unclear. Some described emotional madness. Others described physical collapse. and a few darker records hinted that entire dynasties had fallen after denying the mark's choice, and that fear began to silence even the loudest voices in the room. Queen Elira entered the council chamber without announcement, and every argument stopped instantly. Her expression was unreadable, calm as frozen stone, but the faint blue light under her skin was visible to all. She did not hide it now. She let them see the truth. "You all know the law," she said evenly, her voice steady but carrying quiet force. "The mark has chosen." A general stepped forward carefully, his armor reflecting the chamber lights. "Your Majesty, the mark may have malfunctioned," he suggested, though even he did not sound convinced. The queen lifted her wrist slightly, and the glow brightened in response, steady and strong, not flickering, not unstable. The room grew colder with realization. "There has never been a malfunction," she replied calmly. "Not in 10,000 cycles." Silence followed, heavy and suffocating, because if it was not a malfunction, then it was fate, and fate had just broken every expectation the Empire had built its pride upon. Far below, Daniel suddenly felt a strange heat spread across his chest, not painful, but intense. He looked down at his skin and saw a faint blue pattern forming over his heart, mirroring the shape of the Queen's mark. It shimmered weakly, like it was still waking, and for the first time fear touched him. Not fear of death, but fear of the unknown connection forming without his permission. He pressed his palm against it, and somewhere high above, Queen Elira felt the echo of his touch like a distant heartbeat. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. The bond was strengthening, even with walls and distance between them. One advisor spoke again, voice shaking. "If the human accepts the bond, it becomes permanent. And if he rejects it," another added quietly, "the mark may fade, but the Queen's power could weaken with it." That possibility struck deeper than open rebellion ever could, because Elira's strength was tied to perception, to authority, to control, and now something outside her control had entered her life. A human guard who did not kneel, who did not understand the law, who might refuse it simply because he did not believe in destiny. The Queen made her decision in that moment. Slow but certain. "Prepare the ancient archives," she ordered. "I want every record of cross-species contact in our history." The council members exchanged uneasy looks. There were rumors of forgotten eras, of alliances erased from official memory, of truths buried to protect pride. And deep in the holding chamber, Daniel stood up slowly, staring at the glowing marks spreading faintly across his skin. He did not know the law, he did not know the consequences, but he could feel one thing clearly: whatever this bond was, it was not weak. High above, in the quiet chamber of the Queen, the soul mark pulsed brighter than before, not wild, not chaotic, but steady and alive. And across the Empire, fear began to grow, because the law of the soul mark was unbreakable, and if it truly connected a queen to a human, then the future of the stars was about to change in ways no one was prepared for. The palace had never felt so alert, not even during times of war. Every corridor seemed to listen. Every guard seemed to watch more closely than before, because word had spread that the human was still alive, and that alone was enough to create fear among nobles who believed weakness had entered the throne. But what truly disturbed them was not that he lived. It was that he had not begged for mercy, he had not cried, and most shocking of all, he had not knelt. And in the Zorinthian Empire, kneeling before the Queen was not only respect, it was instinct. Even powerful generals lowered themselves without thinking. Yet the human stood straight, even in chains, and that small act now carried more weight than anyone expected. Queen Elira decided she would see him again, but not as ruler before prisoner. She dismissed her royal guard and ordered a private meeting inside the lower holding chamber. The advisors protested quietly, warning her that tradition demanded distance until the council reached a decision. But she silenced them with a single look, because this was no longer only about tradition. It was about understanding why the mark had chosen him, and whether that choice was mistake or destiny. When she entered the chamber, the energy field flickered and dissolved. Daniel stood in the center of the circular room, his uniform replaced with simple neutral clothing provided by the palace. The faint blue mark over his heart was now clearly visible through the fabric. glowing softly, as if responding to her presence. He looked tired but not broken, alert but not afraid. And when he saw her, he did not drop to his knees. He simply met her eyes, steady and calm. The queen studied him carefully, searching for arrogance or hidden intention. But she saw neither. She saw confusion, strength, and something else she could not yet name. "Do you understand what has happened?" she asked evenly, her voice echoing slightly against the curved walls. Daniel shook his head slowly. "I understand that touching you almost got me killed," he replied honestly, "and that something strange is happening to my chest." His simple answer would have been insulting from anyone else, but there was no mockery in his tone, only truth, and that unsettled her more than fear would have, because fear was easy to control, honesty was not. "The symbol is called the soul mark," she explained, choosing her words carefully. "It binds two beings together when destiny recognizes balance between them." He frowned slightly, processing the meaning. "You were saying I did not choose this." "No," she answered quietly, "you did not. And neither did you," he added after a pause. And that statement hung in the air like a challenge, not disrespectful, but bold, because no one spoke to the queen as equal. No one pointed out that she was also caught in something beyond her control. The mark on her wrist pulsed brighter at his words, and she felt the echo in her chest again, stronger now, like a thread pulling gently between them. "You refuse to kneel," she observed calmly, testing him. "I kneel when I believe someone has earned it," Daniel replied without hesitation. "Not because I am forced." The room seemed to tighten around them. That answer could have been considered treason in any other context, but instead of anger, the queen felt something unexpected, respect. He did not challenge her authority. He simply spoke his truth, and that quiet strength was something rare even among her own kind. Outside the chamber, unseen by them, two noble officers watched through hidden sensors, their expressions dark. They had already begun forming a plan, because if the human gained influence over the queen, their power would weaken, and that was something they would not allow. Orders were whispered through secure channels. A small strike team was prepared, silent and loyal to tradition above all else. Inside, the queen stepped closer to Daniel, close enough that the air between them felt charged. The marks on both of them glowed in response, bright and synchronized, and for a moment neither spoke. They simply felt the connection growing. "Do humans believe in destiny?" she asked quietly. "Some do," he answered. "Some believe we create our own path." "And you?" she pressed gently. "I believe actions matter more than symbols," he said, glancing briefly at the mark on his chest. "If this bond is real, it will show in what we choose to do next." His words struck deeper than he realized, because the soul mark was built on ancient belief. Yet he spoke of choice, of proving worth through action, not relying on fate alone. And that idea planted something new inside her thoughts, something dangerous but powerful. Suddenly the chamber lights flickered. A small warning signal flashed red near the ceiling, and the queen turned sharply, sensing movement beyond the walls. Daniel saw it too, his soldier instincts reacting instantly. The door seal began to override, unauthorized access. The queen's eyes narrowed, betrayal inside her own palace. She understood immediately. This was not random. Someone had decided the human was too risky to keep alive. The door burst open with a sharp metallic crack. Armored figures rushed inside with energy blades raised, moving fast and without hesitation, their target clear. Daniel did not wait for orders. He stepped in front of the queen without thinking, grabbing the nearest attacker's arm and twisting it hard. The blade fell to the floor, sparks flying. He moved with raw human instinct, not advanced alien technique, but pure survival skill, blocking another strike meant for her shoulder. The queen felt shock surge through her, not because of the attack, but because he chose to protect her instead of escape. He had no obligation, no loyalty to her empire, yet he stood between her and death without hesitation. The soul marks blazed with sudden intensity, flooding the chamber with blue light, stronger than before, brighter than ever. And in that glowing chaos, as steel clashed and betrayal unfolded, the queen realized something terrifying and undeniable. The human who did not kneel was not weak, and the bond between them was no longer just destiny. It was becoming choice. The clash inside the holding chamber was fast and violent. Energy blades hummed through the air, striking sparks from the alloy walls, and the smell of burned metal mixed with the sharp scent of blood. The rebel soldiers moved with precision, their armor marked with the hidden symbol of the Purity Circle, a secret faction that believed the Empire must never mix with lesser species. And to them the human was not just a mistake of fate. He was a threat to everything they had protected for centuries. Daniel felt the heat of a blade pass close to his shoulder, slicing fabric and skin, but he did not step back. He pushed forward instead, grabbing one attacker and slamming him into the wall with raw strength. He had no advanced alien training, no enhanced armor, only human reflexes sharpened by years of survival, and that unpredictability caught the rebels off guard. Queen Aelira did not remain still either. She extended her hand and unleashed a controlled burst of royal energy, a power inherited through her bloodline. It struck two attackers at once, throwing them across the chamber with bone-crushing force. Her eyes were no longer calm. They burned with controlled fury. Betrayal inside her own palace was not just rebellion, it was treason against the throne. Yet even as she fought, she felt the strange echo of Daniel's movements through the bond. Every time he was struck, her wrist pulsed with heat. Every time he stood firm, the glow steadied her breath. Their connection was no longer faint. It was alive and reactive. One rebel slipped past her defense and lunged directly toward Daniel's unprotected back. The blade aimed for his heart where the new mark glowed beneath his shirt. Time seemed to slow in that instant. The queen felt a sharp spike of fear unlike anything she had experienced in battle before. Not fear for herself, but for him. And without thinking, she moved faster than she ever had, placing herself between the blade and the human. The energy edge grazed her side, cutting through fabric and drawing dark alien blood that shimmered under the chamber lights. The sight froze everyone for half a second, because royal blood had not been spilled inside the palace in over 100 cycles. Daniel turned and saw the wound. Anger flashed across his face. Not panic, not confusion, but fierce protective anger, and he reacted with sudden force, striking the attacker down with a blow so strong the soldier's helmet cracked against the floor. The remaining rebels hesitated, realizing the attack had failed, but before they could retreat, the main doors of the chamber exploded open again, this time with loyal royal guards rushing in, weapons raised and precise. The rebels were quickly surrounded, disarmed, and forced to their knees, their attempt at silent execution now exposed before the throne. The chamber fell into heavy silence, broken only by the sound of the queen's steady breathing. Daniel stood close to her, one hand hovering near her wounded side, as if unsure whether he was allowed to touch her. The soul marks on both of them glowed intensely, brighter than at any time before, responding not to accident, but to shared danger, shared choice. The queen slowly straightened despite the pain, her expression colder than ice. She looked at the captured rebels and spoke with quiet authority. "You raised weapons within my palace," she said, her voice calm but deadly. "You attempted to kill under my protection." None of the rebels answered, but fear was visible in their rigid posture. They had expected quick success, not public failure. Daniel finally stepped back slightly, his breathing heavy, blood running down his arm from a shallow cut. Yet his eyes remained steady on the queen. "You are bleeding," he said simply, not as subject to ruler, but as one soldier to another, and for a moment that equality felt stronger than any royal command. The queen glanced at her wound, dark liquid staining her white robe, and then at him. "So are you," she replied quietly, and something unspoken passed between them. A silent understanding formed not by destiny alone, but by action, by standing side by side in real danger. Outside the chamber, the news was already spreading. Royal blood spilled, rebels captured, the human fighting beside the queen instead of hiding behind her. Rumors grew fast, some calling it weakness, others calling it a sign of strength, because many citizens had witnessed the glow through palace sensors. They had seen the queen shield the human, and the human shield the queen, and that image carried power far beyond the throne room walls. The council was summoned immediately. The captured rebels brought before them in chains, and the queen entered the grand hall still marked with fresh bandages across her side, refusing medical isolation to show she remained unbroken. Daniel walked behind her under guard, not as prisoner now, but not yet free. Whispers followed their steps like shadows. When the council demanded explanation, the queen did not hesitate. "The human remains under my direct protection," she declared firmly, her voice echoing through the vast chamber. "Any harm against him is harm against the throne." Gasps spread across the nobles. This was no longer quiet tolerance, it was open declaration. Daniel felt the weight of thousands of alien eyes on him, judging, doubting, fearing, yet he did not kneel. He stood upright, injured but steady, and the soul mark on his chest glowed faintly beneath his clothing, visible through the thin fabric like living fire. The queen raised her wrist so all could see the matching light, and for the first time she did not hide it. She let it shine openly before her empire. "This bond is real," she continued, and today it was proven in blood. The hall fell silent, because blood carried meaning deeper than tradition. Blood meant sacrifice. Blood meant loyalty tested under danger, and both of them had bled within the same chamber, defending each other. Far beyond the palace walls, in hidden rooms beneath the capital, members of the Purity Circle watched the council broadcast with dark expressions. Their failed attempt had only strengthened the symbol they wanted erased, and now they understood that simple assassination would not solve the problem. The bond was growing too visible, too powerful. One of them spoke quietly into the shadows. "If we cannot remove the human quietly, we will remove the queen's throne itself." Back inside the council hall, as debates began to rise again, the queen felt the bond pulse once more, not in fear this time, but in strength. She had defended him publicly, he had defended her physically, and the empire had witnessed it all. Blood had been spilled in the palace, but instead of weakening the throne, it had revealed something dangerous to those who feared change. The human was no longer just a prisoner, and the rebellion was no longer just whispering in the dark. The palace did not sleep that night. Even when the stars above the capital dimmed into artificial twilight, lights remained active in the deepest archive chambers beneath the throne, because Queen Aelira had given a rare and dangerous command. She wanted the sealed records opened, not the public histories polished for citizens, but the forbidden texts locked away since the first dynasty, the truth behind the soul mark, untouched and unedited. And such an order alone sent quiet fear through the royal scholars, because some truths were buried not to protect knowledge, but to protect power. Daniel was moved from the holding chamber to a guarded guest wing, not quite a prisoner, not yet honored, watched carefully, but treated with unexpected respect. Healers had sealed the cut on his arm, yet the mark over his heart remained bright and alive, sometimes warming without warning, sometimes pulsing when he thought of the queen. He did not understand the science or the ancient belief behind it, but he felt the connection growing stronger, like an invisible thread tightening between two distant points. And with every passing hour, he realized something troubling. He no longer wanted the bond to disappear. Far below the palace floors, in a circular stone hall carved from ancient rock, the oldest royal archivist activated crystal pillars that had not been used in centuries. Holographic texts rose into the air, glowing symbols shifting like moving constellations. Queen Aelira stood at the center, silent and focused, while the scholar translated passages from the First Era, a time long before her empire ruled the stars, when her species had not yet declared itself superior to all others. The first revelation struck quietly but deeply. The soul mark was not created as a royal privilege. It was not limited to bloodline or race. It was described as a universal resonance, a biological and energetic reaction that formed when two beings shared rare alignment in courage, will, and emotional strength. Species was never mentioned as a requirement, only balance, only equal fire. The archivist hesitated before revealing the next sealed fragment, but the queen ordered him to continue. The second revelation was far more dangerous. Early records spoke of a time when the ancestors of her people had formed alliances with other intelligent species, bonds of partnership not built on dominance, but on survival. The mark had appeared across different forms of life during those early expansion years, and those bonds had strengthened civilizations instead of weakening them. But later dynasties erased those alliances from official history, choosing purity and control over unity, rewriting the narrative to claim the soul mark only blessed their own kind. The chamber felt colder as the truth unfolded, because this was not malfunction, not error, not curse. It was correction, destiny returning to its original design. And if that truth became public, it would shatter centuries of pride. Above ground, whispers spread faster than ever. Citizens debated in markets and transport hubs, some calling the glowing bond a sign of evolution, others calling it corruption of tradition. The purity circle used the uncertainty as fuel, spreading fear that the queen had been influenced, that humans were secretly manipulating ancient technology, that the empire would collapse if the throne embraced weakness. Small protests began forming near the outer districts of the capital, subtle at first, but growing louder. Daniel felt the tension even without hearing the rumors directly. Palace guards watched him differently now, not with simple suspicion, but with curiosity. Some even nodded slightly in respect after hearing how he defended the queen. Yet others looked at him with silent anger, as if his existence alone insulted their heritage. He stood alone on a balcony overlooking the city lights, feeling the mark pulse again, stronger than before. And somewhere within the palace the queen paused mid-step, sensing the same rhythm echo through her veins. When she returned from the archives, her expression was not fearful. It was resolved. She requested a private meeting with Daniel inside one of the palace gardens, a place surrounded by bioluminescent trees and quiet water streams designed to calm the mind. When he arrived, he noticed the faint bandage at her side, but she stood tall despite the wound, stronger than before. "There is something you should know," she began calmly, her voice softer than it had ever been in public. She explained the truth uncovered in the archives, the erased alliances, the original purpose of the soul mark, the fact that their bond was not breaking tradition. It was revealing history long hidden. Daniel listened carefully, not interrupting, not reacting with arrogance, just absorbing the weight of it all. "So, this is not about species," he said finally. "It is about strength." "Yes," she answered quietly. "Strength of spirit, strength of choice." He looked at her directly. "Then the Empire is not afraid of me because I am human," he realized slowly. "It is afraid because I might be equal." The honesty of that statement hung in the air like a blade. Because it was true, equality threatened hierarchies more than invasion ever could. Before either could speak further, an emergency signal echoed across the palace, a warning from the outer districts. Riots had turned violent, purity circle banners raised openly, and one of the outer defense towers had been sabotaged. The rebellion was no longer hidden. It was stepping into the light. The queen's eyes hardened, not in doubt, but in clarity. The time for secrecy had ended. The truth behind the mark was powerful. But truth alone would not stop war. She turned toward the palace towers, feeling the bond between them pulse like a battle drum. "They will force me to choose," she said quietly. Daniel stepped beside her, not behind, not below, but beside. "Then choose what is right," he replied simply. And in that moment, the soul marks flared brighter than ever before, not just glowing, but shifting slightly in shape, as if evolving, as if responding to shared resolve. Far below the city streets, the leaders of the Purity Circle watched reports of growing unrest. Satisfied that chaos was spreading faster than answers, they prepared their final move, not just against the human, but against the throne itself. Because if the queen revealed the true history of the mark, the empire would never return to its old shape. And revolutions are not only born from lies. Sometimes they are born from truth. The capital no longer whispered. It roared. Smoke rose from the outer districts where defense towers burned against the night sky. Transport lanes were blocked by shattered vehicles, and emergency signals echoed across every public channel. The Purity Circle had moved from hidden rebellion to open war, their symbols projected across hacked city screens, their message clear and loud. The Queen had betrayed the Empire, and the throne must be reclaimed before weakness destroyed them all. Inside the Palace War Council chamber, alarms flashed red. Generals shouted over tactical maps, and security shields activated around the royal towers. But Queen Aelira did not look shaken. She looked focused. Her wound was sealed, her posture straight, and the soul mark on her wrist burned brighter than ever, as if it understood that destiny had reached its testing point. Daniel stood beside her in light combat armor provided by the Royal Guard. Not decorated, not royal, but practical. And though many officers still doubted him, none could ignore that he had already bled inside the palace. He studied the moving holographic battlefield quietly, noticing patterns others dismissed. The rebels were not attacking randomly. They were targeting communication hubs and energy relays first, isolating the palace from outer military fleets, a simple but effective tactic. And when he pointed this out, some alien commanders bristled at taking advice from a human. But the Queen listened carefully. They fight to control fear, Daniel said calmly. If they control the message, they control the people. His words were simple, but they cut through confusion. The Queen immediately ordered counter signals sent through hidden backup channels, a system in use for centuries, and within minutes loyal districts regained communication. Rebel propaganda streams were interrupted, replaced by the Queen's steady image projected across the city. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She spoke clearly, explaining that the soul mark was ancient and sacred, that the rebellion was built on fear, not truth. And as she spoke, the mark on her wrist glowed visibly, impossible to ignore. Outside the palace walls, the fighting intensified. Rebel strike ships descended from the upper atmosphere, firing controlled blasts at defense platforms, and loyal fleet commanders scrambled to respond. But chaos made coordination difficult. Daniel requested permission to join the outer defensive line, a bold request that silenced the chamber for a moment. Sending him into open combat would risk the bond directly. If he fell, the Queen might suffer consequences no one fully understood. "You are not required to fight," one general warned, his tone cautious. "I'm already part of this fight," Daniel answered evenly, glancing briefly at the glowing mark on his chest. "If they win, it will not matter where I stand." The Queen felt the truth in his words. The bond pulsed with agreement. And for the first time, she made a decision not as ruler calculating risk, but as partner accepting shared fate. "You will command the Eastern Defense Unit," she declared firmly, shocking several officers. "Your tactics have already proven effective." Daniel did not smile. He simply nodded once and moved with purpose. The guards who once chained him now followed his orders into battle corridors leading toward the outer towers. The eastern sector was under heavy assault. Rebel forces had breached one shield generator and were advancing through smoke-filled streets. Daniel moved quickly, organizing defensive squads into small mobile teams instead of rigid formations. He used narrow alleyways to funnel attackers into choke points, turning their numerical advantage against them. Alien soldiers who had doubted him began to see results. Rebel units slowed, then halted, then began retreating under coordinated counter strikes. Above the battlefield, Queen Aelira joined the aerial defense platform. Her presence alone strengthening morale, she unleashed controlled waves of royal energy to disable rebel ships without destroying civilian zones. Her movements precise, powerful, but her focus divided, because through the bond she could feel Daniel's position like a second heartbeat. Every surge of danger sent a sharp pulse through her veins, and every victory steadied her breath. At the height of the battle, a massive rebel cruiser emerged from hyperspace above the capital, larger than expected, armed with heavy bombardment cannons capable of leveling entire districts. It positioned itself directly over the palace towers, shields glowing ominously, and a message transmitted openly, demanding the Queen renounce the human and restore pure leadership or face destruction. The war council froze. This was escalation beyond prediction. But before fear could settle, Daniel's voice came through the tactical channel. calm despite explosions echoing in the background. "They are not here to destroy the palace," he said. "They are here to force you to choose publicly." The queen understood immediately. If she rejected him to save the capital, the rebellion would claim victory. If she defended him openly, the empire would witness her final stance. Silence lasted only a second. "Prepare the flagship," she ordered, her voice steady as stone. Gasps filled the channel. Leading the counterattack personally was unprecedented in internal conflict. But she did not hesitate. She launched into the sky aboard her royal command vessel, shields blazing blue, heading straight toward the rebel cruiser. Daniel watched from the street below as the flagship rose like a burning star, and without waiting for orders, he redirected ground artillery to support her trajectory, ignoring traditional command hierarchy, trusting instinct and the connection guiding him. In orbit above the capital, the two ships faced each other, weapons charging, tensions stretching thin. The rebel leader appeared on open broadcast, accusing the queen of corruption and weakness, declaring that the empire would fall if ruled by divided blood. The queen did not argue with anger. She lifted her wrist before every sensor, the soul mark glowing intensely. Then she spoke clearly. "Strength is not fear of change," she said. "Strength is the courage to stand for truth even when tradition resists." At that exact moment, Daniel reached the eastern artillery tower and manually overrode its targeting system, synchronizing it with the flagship's shield frequency, creating a narrow opening in the rebel cruiser's defense grid, a risky maneuver that required perfect timing. Through the bond, without words, she felt his signal. She fired, not wildly, but precisely into the exposed gap, disabling the cruiser's primary weapons without destroying the ship. The explosion lit the upper atmosphere like dawn breaking early, and rebel forces below hesitated as their strongest symbol faltered. Loyal fleets surged forward, surrounding the damaged cruiser, and within minutes the rebellion's central command collapsed. Ground forces began surrendering, their momentum shattered. As silence slowly returned to the city, Daniel leaned against the artillery controls, breathing heavily, the mark on his chest blazing with intense blue light. Across the sky, the Queen's flagship descended safely, her own mark shining just as bright, no longer flickering, no longer uncertain, but transformed, its shape slightly altered, stronger, more defined, as if the bond itself had matured through battle. The war had not only tested loyalty, it had revealed choice. And as citizens watched the broadcast replay across the capital, many realized something undeniable. The human had not weakened the throne. He had fought for it. The smoke above the capital slowly faded, but the tension in the empire did not disappear so easily. Broken towers still stood like wounded giants against the sky. Transport lanes were filled with repair ships, and citizens watched endless replays of the battle that had almost changed their history forever. The rebel cruiser now floated in controlled orbit under royal guard, its weapons silent, its message defeated. But the real decision had not yet been made, because war had been stopped by force. Yet the future would be decided by choice, and every world within the seven-star systems waited for the Queen's next words. Queen Aelira stood alone for a moment in the highest observation chamber of the palace, the stars stretching endlessly before her, the soul mark on her wrist glowing steady and calm. No longer wild-like when it first awakened, no longer burning in pain like during battle, it felt balanced now, strong and certain, and she understood that this was the true meaning behind the ancient law. The mark did not exist to preserve bloodlines. It existed to guide evolution, to force growth when fear tried. To stop it, behind her footsteps echoed softly, and she knew without turning that it was Daniel. The bond made distance meaningless between them. He stepped beside her, not as prisoner, not as soldier under command, but as equal partner in the silence, his armor removed, simple clothing once again resting against his shoulders, the mark on his chest glowing through the fabric like quiet fire. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. They simply looked at the stars, understanding that the hardest battle was not the one fought with ships and weapons, but the one about to be fought with tradition and belief. The council is waiting, Daniel said calmly, his voice steady. They are afraid, she replied quietly, not as ruler judging subjects, but as someone who finally understood her people's fear. They should be, he answered honestly. Change is heavier than war. A faint smile touched her expression for the first time since the mark awakened, because his words were simple, yet deeply true, and that simplicity had become something she valued more than elaborate alien philosophy. The Grand Council hall filled quickly. Nobles, generals, scholars, and representatives from outer systems connected through holographic projection. The entire empire watching, some with hope, some with anger, some with fear that their world was about to shift permanently. When the queen entered, silence fell immediately. Daniel walked beside her openly. No guards forcing distance, no chains. And the sight alone caused murmurs to ripple across the chamber. She did not sit on her throne at first. She remained standing at the center of the hall, lifting her wrists so all could see the soul mark glowing clearly. The rebellion has been defeated, she began calmly. But the cause of that rebellion remains. Her voice carried not anger, but clarity, the fear that our strength will fade if we evolve. She gestured toward the archive records projected behind her, ancient symbols and forgotten alliances displayed openly for the first time in centuries. Gasps filled the hall as erased history appeared before them. Proof that the soul mark had never been limited by species. Proof that unity had once built their early civilization instead of dividing it. Our ancestors were not weakened by partnership, she continued steadily. They were strengthened by it. A senior noble rose sharply, demanding to know whether she intended to rewrite the laws entirely. Whether humans would now stand equal in the empire, whether bloodline traditions meant nothing. Tension filled the chamber again, and all eyes turned toward the human who did not kneel. Daniel stepped forward only when she allowed it, his movements respectful but not submissive. I did not ask for this bond, he said clearly, his voice echoing across the hall, but I chose to fight for this empire when it was attacked. Murmurs softened slightly, not because I wanted power, but because protecting what is right matters more than pride. His words were simple, but they held weight forged in battle, and many soldiers present remembered seeing him defend the eastern towers, remembered the way he stood between the queen and death without hesitation. The soul marks on both of them brightened as if responding to shared resolve, their glow steady and synchronized, no longer unstable. And something remarkable happened in that moment. A few faint glimmers appeared among the crowd. Small dormant marks on distant wrists flickered briefly as if stirred by possibility. Subtle, but visible. The ancient law awakening not in rebellion, but in recognition. The queen finally ascended her throne, but she did not sit alone. She extended her hand toward Daniel, and after a brief pause he took it, not as conquest, not as surrender, but as agreement. The chamber watched breathlessly as their marks flared once more and then settled into a new form, slightly altered, stronger lines woven into the symbol, as if destiny itself had accepted the decision. I will not reject the truth of our history, she declared firmly, her voice echoing across every connected system. And I will not deny the bond that has proven itself in blood and battle. She paused only briefly before continuing. From this day forward, strength in this empire will not be measured by purity of species, but by courage of heart. Silence held for a heartbeat, then another, and slowly the tension shifted. Not all accepted it instantly. Some nobles remained rigid, some systems would resist, but the majority did not rise in outrage. They remained thoughtful, uncertain, yet not hostile, because the rebellion had already tested the alternative, and fear had almost destroyed them. Outside the palace walls, citizens gathered in quiet groups, watching the broadcast, seeing not weakness, but partnership, not collapse, but evolution, and across distant colonies discussions began not about overthrowing the throne, but about what a shared future might look like. As the council session ended and the hall gradually emptied, Queen Aelira and Daniel remained standing side by side beneath the glowing ceiling, the weight of their decision settling around them like calm after storm. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly, her voice no longer royal command, but personal curiosity. He looked at her honestly, the faint blue light reflecting in his eyes. "No," he answered simply, "because you were worth standing with." The soul mark warmed gently at his words. Not burning, not flashing, just steady and alive. Beyond the palace, the first repair ships completed their work. Defense towers rose again. Communication lines reopened fully, and the Empire stepped into an uncertain but promising dawn. For the first time in its long history, destiny had not been used as a chain to hold the future still. It had been used as a bridge. And under a sky filled with distant stars, a queen and a human stood not as ruler and prisoner, but as partners shaping a new era together.